The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, welcome the opportunity to engage in this estimate debate on vote environment, and want to acknowledge the contributions made both by my colleague and the Chairman, Scott Simpson, as well as David Parker. The first point I want to focus on the areas where there's agreement, because it is the government's view that the three most important environmental issues for our country is firstly the issue of climate change, something of which the PCE recently highlighted in the review of the government's new environment reporting system. That the second most important priority is with respect to freshwater quality, and I also agree with Mr Parker, the issue there is the one of the non-point discharge, of which we agree that that's a really important area where we need to increase our game. I would add a very important third, and that is the issue of biodiversity protection. When I am privileged to represent New Zealand in international forum around the environment, I'm incredibly proud of New Zealand's clean green brand in so many areas in which we rank very well. The one in which every New Zealander should be concerned is the fact that we have more endangered species than any other country, and that we've got a real duty to lift our game in that area, and the work that Maggie Barry is doing as Minister of Conservation, whether it is the battle for the birds, whether it's the war on weeds, whether it's the new partnerships with Conservation Group, and just to mention one, I celebrate the record number 34 kakapo chicks. I note when I was Minister, I got all excited when there were 3. This year there were 32. And that is a real tribute to the work of the Department of Conservation. Can I go back to the issue of climate change? The biggest vote, environment, is for climate change. That is the government saying this is the most important issue. I have a challenge for critics. No, if you take the net, of the amount that the government is taking, and here's a challenge for the Labor and opposition members. Tell me a country that has a more comprehensive emissions trading scheme, or a country that has a higher carbon price than the $17 that polluters today are having to pay. Because the truth is, in Europe, they exempt the whole transport sector. Actually, every person in the transport sector, every time you get on a plane, every time you're in a car, you are paying a price for carbon. Equally so, here's the numbers, and I do challenge the Parliament. In the period from 1990 to 1999, emissions in New Zealand grew by 12%. In the period of the last Labor government, from 1999 to 2008, they grew by 18%. 18%. In the term of this government, those numbers have dropped significantly to 3%. And that is a tribute to the progress that we've made in an area like electricity, where emissions were going up under the last government but are coming down under this government. And I make no apologies for the fact that this government has made a record investment in the issue of greenhouse gas emissions from the farming sector. And I point out to Mr Parker, actually, over those 26 years since 1990, the sector that's had the smallest increase in emissions is actually the agricultural sector. And there is no point in adding agriculture into the ETS unless we have practical technologies that will enable farmers to reduce their emissions, and the truth is that those technologies are not yet available. I want to come to the issue of fresh water. This budget provides for a $100 million further investment in cleanups around the country. That is on top of the $250 million over the next 10 years that is already committed. Yes, it does, Mr Parker. It's an extra on top of the $100 million. And again, I'd challenge the numbers. Here's the story. Over the entire period from 2000 to 2008, Mr Parker's government spent on cleanups around the country $15 million. 15. We have already spent 115. We've committed a further 250. This government's program of work around freshwater. Let me give another example. We didn't even measure how much water was being taken. When we came to government, the total proportion of water that was metered across our country was 15%. That number is now over 80% heading, Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
That number is now heading for 96%. And it is true that as a consequence of metering those takes in areas like Canterbury, we are identifying people that have breached their consent, and I know parties like the Greens are calling foul. What I'd say to them, though, is that we only know now. Actually, when Labor and the Greens were in government, they didn't know whether anybody was breaching their consent because they only bothered to measure 13% of them, and that shows the progress that we're making around a fresh water program. The further point I'd make is Labor can talk all they like about national policy statements. This government has done more national policy statements than what either it...
I'm going to just interrupt the member now and remind him of the scope of the debate. I'll have two members stand and withdraw.
I withdraw. I withdraw.
The estimates debate should be relevant to the government's current spending plans as contained in the estimates of appropriations. We are going to be tighter on that as well as tighter on the chairs.
Mr Chairman.
Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, these estimates provide for a very active program around the delivery of both national policy statements and national environment standards to continue our work of strengthening the Resource Management Act framework. For instance, the next National Environment Standard that we will be completing is the one around telecommunications and the amendments to enable us to make progress there. There's the very important one with respect to pest control that is out for consultation currently that is going to make it far more efficient to deal with those predator pests that pose such a risk to our native animals. There's the national policy statement that we're currently consulting on with respect to urban development. There's the new national policy statement around natural hazards that we think will improve that framework around how we deal with those issues. Mr Chairman, this is a comprehensive program where priorities are being set around climate change, around the issues of biodiversity, around the issues of fresh water, and very proud of the progress that we are making and which these estimates will enable us to continue to make.
Mr Speaker.
Dr Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, sir. Tēnā koutou te whare.